36 seconds in, Trump slammed the table, pointed at Jasmine Crockett, and spat the phrases, "She's low IQ, I dare her to take a look at." Cameras snapped, gasps rose, however Jasmine failed to blink. She reached into her folder, pulled out a sealed envelope, and permitted it fall like a hammer. What become internal that made the maximum boastful guy in America sit returned in silence like he'd simply visible a ghost. The listening to room seemed like it hadn't seen an actual reality in years. The entirety was too best, like a person had Windexed democracy. The marble floors glistened like wet ice. The partitions were polished to the factor you may see your judgment of right and wrong in them. Flags stood at the back of the day as stiff and useless, like that they had been ironed into submission. Even the air felt staged, too bloodless, too sterile, like someone had frizzed the anxiety right out of the air, however left the worry at the back of. Pink lighting from the microphones blinked like sniper dots on each seat above them. The ceiling lighting fixtures didn't glow, they stabbed. Shiny surgical medical designed to show every crack, every drop of sweat, every twitch inside the face of someone lying through their enamel. This wasn't simply Capitol Hill. This changed into Capitol Theater. In present-day headliner, a female who failed to need a microphone to make her presence acknowledged. Jasmine Crockett walked in like she'd done this earlier then, but by no means like this. Her heels didn't clack. They struck. Every step landed with the rhythm of a countdown, now not in the direction of detonation, but revelation. She wore no flashy coloration, no flashy smile, just a middle-of-the-night blue fit sharp sufficient to reduce via pretense, and a gaze consistent enough to freeze the boastful proper off a billionaire's face. Jim Jordan stuck sight of her first. He nudged Eric Trump, leaned in, and mumbled something like, "Hi college boys," in the back of detention, half of giggling, half of scared, all conceitedness. Eric looked over his shoulder, sized her up like she became an outfit his daddy failed to approve of, and shook his head. Already seated at the witness table became the storm and orange flesh, Donald J. Trump. Elbows planted, fingers, steepled grin huge, the sort of grin that said, "This room belongs to me, the cameras belong to me. The truth belongs to me." He did not nod in greeting. He didn't blink. Just locked eyes with Jasmine as she surpassed like a lion looking to psych out the one animal in the wild that failed to care approximately his roar. However, Jasmine, she did not balk. She didn't even acknowledge the noise. She sat down without a sound, opened her folder like it turned into Sunday Mass, and she or he had the sermon prepared and laid one envelope gently within the center. No label, no urgency, just paper and silence. But come what may, the air modified when it touched the wooden like static, like gunpowder. CNN's feed zoomed in. MSNBC sharpened their audio. Twitter changed into already midway to exploding. The word IQ test was trending even though it hadn't been spoken aloud, but Chairman Emlen cleared his throat like he was about to study a verdict. Modern-day hearing will take a look at academic transparency credentials used in campaign claims and the position of standardized trying out in public management. He did not have a look at Trump, however the room did. Jasmine tapped the envelope as soon as, simply once, no longer difficult, however the sound landed like a choose's gavel. Sharp, very last, simple. Trump's smile faltered only for a beat. No one else saw it, however Jasmine did. And while a person like Trump blinks first, you don't want to shout. You just sit nevertheless and allow the lure snap close on its very own. What takes place while the loudest man in the USA dares the incorrect girl to talk? The silence in the room became so dense it had weight. No longer the non-violent kind, but the kind that comes earlier than thunder. Trump leaned closer to the mic, straightened his shoulders like he become gearing up for applause, and began studying from his organized remarks on education reform. However, he failed to get a long way. He slightly made it through a sentence on restoring American excellence in educational requirements earlier than his eyes flicked in the direction of Jasmine and the air shifted. He paused, smiled. No longer the type that charms, but the kind that coils. And frankly, he started voice easy like oil on concrete. Some of these people, they are not certified to be on this room. I imply, look at that one. His finger lifted, now not pretty pointing, but angled in Jasmine's root like a loaded weapon. Low IQ, au sitwo. I wouldn't permit either of them run a lecture room, not to mention Congress. There it became, the primary strike, blunt, calculated, and simply vague enough to avoid censure till the cameras caught each syllable. A faint giggle broke from the right facet of the room. Marjorie Taylor Greene's laugh, sharp, nasal, arrogant. She covered her mouth as though to mask it, however her shoulders shook. Jim Jordan smirked. Eric Trump leaned lower back in his chair like a kid proud of his father for landing a punch. Round them, Republican aides tried now not to grin, but they didn't want to. The moment had landed. The idea they had rattled her, however. Jasmine Crockett did not pass, didn't blink, did not reach for the mic. She simply sat there, nevertheless accumulated a single fingertip resting gently on the sealed envelope in the front of her. Find it irresistible was a detonator she hadn't decided to press. Inside her head, the noise changed into louder than any chamber mic. They want rage, she concept. They need the angry black girl moment, they want the sound chew. I will supply them something quieter, something they won't see coming. Trump, emboldened, pressed on. You know, I have taken IQ checks, very tough ones. They don't just allow absolutely everyone take those. You know, you have to be a genius. His grin stretched wider, eye-handed with flying hues. This is why I am here, and they may be well suffering. He failed to observe the chairman. He did not examine the cameras. He looked immediately at Jasmine. And then with the same breathless arrogance he used to announce bankruptcies and pardons, he stated it. Let's settle this with an IQ take a look at. 8 phrases, that is all it took. 8 phrases that could ricochet across social media within seconds. 8 words that could split the room like glass underneath stress. 8 phrases that would in 24 hours come return to haunt him. The anxiety cracked. Newshounds blinked. Telephones went up. Gasps stirred like wind in a wheat field. But Jasmine did not even improve an eyebrow. She sincerely shifted in her seat, lifted the envelope ever so slightly, and slid it 1 inch in the direction of the mic. The gesture was quiet, but it landed like thunder. Trump did not note it. He was too busy looking the group, relishing the chaos he thought he managed. However, chaos Jasmine knew become less complicated to govern than records. Especially once they got here in sealed white paper. And behind that paper turned into a truth 31 million people weren't geared up for. Now not yet, but they might be. Because Donald Trump had just challenged the incorrect woman to take a look at. The room hadn't recovered from the blow yet. Trump leaned lower back in his chair like a boxer who concept he'd already received the fit in round 1. Eric smirked beside him, scrolling via his smartphone, possibly looking the clip already trending on X. Jim Jordan whispered to Marjorie, who scribbled something in formidable Sharpie throughout a yellow notepad. Every person notion Jasmine Crockett had taken the hit and stayed down, but then Jasmine leaned closer to the clerk's table calmly, even politely. I'd like to move my questioning to the cease of the session, she stated. Her voice did not upward thrust. It failed to want to. It became the type of calm that makes a room shift slow and nearly invisible, like a trade in barometric stress before a tornado. The clerk blinked. The chairman paused. And after a beat too long, he nodded, authorized. No one blinked. Nobody requested why, but a few eyes narrowed just slightly. They knew something had changed, they just didn't know what. In the meantime, aides from Jasmine's workplace moved silently within the lower back hall like ghosts with motive. One carried a black leather folio, the alternative a flat brown envelope, thick however sealed. At the top in fading typewriter ink had been 4 phrases that hadn't seen daytime in over 60 years. Confidential 1964 admissions. Jasmine did not look returned because it arrived. She did not need to. The moment it touched the table behind her chair, she felt it. Not in her fingers, in her spine. The weight of records has a pulse of its own. She reached again, slid the envelope below her papers, and rested her arms on it like she changed into retaining down a ghost looking to rise too early. Throughout the room, Trump saved speaking, rambling now about schools failing test scores, losing those people not knowledge what America genuinely wishes. The words have been loud, however they did not land anymore. Now not wherein it mattered, because Jasmine wasn't taking note of him. She was listening to a memory years in the past. Her father, an inner-city teacher who by no means made greater than $42,000 a year, as soon as advised her at the kitchen desk. The maximum dangerous thing you may carry into a room is the reality dressed like a whisper. She turned into 9. She did not recognize it then. Now she lived through it. She smiled. No longer the sort that confirmed tooth, the kind that confirmed calculation, poise. The sort of smile a chess grasp makes before sliding a pawn that traps the king in 3 movements. The chairman known as for recess. Chairs scraped. Journalists typed. Security shifted. Trump stretched and laughed about wasting time on no persons. But for the primary time on account that she entered the room, he didn't observe Jasmine due to the fact somewhere in his instincts buried below ego and layers of spin, something told him she wasn't completed. Not even close, and she wasn't holding paper, she became holding evidence. The type that does not shout, the sort that detonates. But what become in that envelope, that might make Donald Trump wish the cameras have been became off. The mood inside the room had modified, however no one should say exactly when. It wasn't loud. It failed to include track or shouting. It was the manner air feels special earlier than a thunderstorm, the sort that turns leaves the wrong way up and makes animals cross silent. Something had shifted and it become coming from Jasmine Crockett's seat. She hadn't spoken on the grounds that Trump's outburst. No longer a phrase, no longer a look. However, her silence had weight now. She'd asked the very last questioning slot and no person dared project her again. It changed into as if by announcing not anything, she'd by hook or by crook taken the ground, and no one observed until it turned into too late. The cameras noticed, although CNN's feed zoomed in, catching her face among actions. That gaze, still unreadable, wasn't anger. It became recognition, like someone looking a clock that they had already set to detonate. Even the host returned within the studio stammered, well, it seems like Congresswoman Crockett is keeping something back these days. We're going to stay on her feed." Outdoor the chamber, buzz constructed like static. NBC's information alert pinged. Jasmine Crockett declines on the spot, rebuttal requested to move final. The headlines accelerated. What's she waiting for? Does Crockett have something bigger? Silence or approach? Inside, she did not blink. She just sat with that folder in the front of her, quiet, deliberate fingers loosely curled around a pen she hadn't uncapped. Now and again, she glanced at her watch. No longer the time, just the rhythm, like she changed into sinking her breath to something nobody else ought to hear. 3 seats away, Marjorie Taylor Greene eventually whispered to Jim Jordan, "She's rattled. She's forgiven not anything." Jordan nodded, but not optimistically. His eyes stored drifting to Jasmine's folder, to the envelope underneath it. Trump, meanwhile, had shifted from arrogance to indulgence, speak me louder, broader, losing self-congratulations like confetti. "Frankly, folks, I assume this has been certainly one of my first-class hearings. Nobody even tried to discuss me." His voice echoed throughout the marble like terrible theater. "All of us recognize who is certified on this room and who isn't," but Jasmine wasn't watching him. She turned into watching the room, looking who laughed, who shifted in their seats, who prevented eye touch. She wasn't here to argue. She turned into right here to permit the rope play out until the knot tightened itself. One of her aides leaned silent, surgical, entered the side hallway and surpassed a small sign, a nod, a quiet look towards her cell phone. Jasmine studied the message as soon as and slid it away without response. The remaining piece had arrived. The report became showed. The supply changed into actual. It changed into time, but now not yet. Permit him hold smiling. Let all of them maintain giggling. Due to the fact the element approximately traps is that they work pleasant whilst nobody is aware of their status in one. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't ready due to the fact she become afraid. She become waiting due to the fact whilst the truth drops, while it honestly drops, it is not a clap. It's an earthquake. And this hearing room had no concept how close the fault line turned into. It got here without fanfare, just a gentle knock on the facet door of the chamber. One in every of Jasmine's aides entered, holding a simple manila envelope tucked tight underneath one arm like a message too risky to spread in public. No person observed her in the beginning. That changed into the splendor of timing. In a room enthusiastic about sound, silence continually carried the sharpest blade. Jasmine failed to appearance up right away. She waited till the useful resource stood immediately behind her chair, then reached lower back, not with urgency, however precision. Her fingers closed around the envelope. Love, it wasn't paper, but a fit. And somewhere deep in her memory, her father's voice returned. The maximum risky factor you can convey into a room is the reality dressed like a whisper. She located it under her notes, careful, calm, as if it had been simply any other document in a stack. But it wasn't. It became the ultimate piece, the only that had taken weeks of silence, a signed affidavit, 2 historical past tests, and the cooperation of a man who hadn't spoken publicly in 58 years. The call at the document turned into redacted, However, Jasmine knew it by means of heart now. Robert Steedman, a former Army school classmate of Donald J. Trump, a man whose face had elderly tough, however whose reminiscence hadn't blinked as soon as during a 2-hour deposition performed with the aid of Crockett's legal team. He had taken the SATs in vicinity of Trump in 1964, and he had kept the receipt. In the envelope have been 2 pages. 1. A dated letter from the Big Apple Military Academy registrar's workplace confirming Trump's scheduled exam date and noting his unexplained absence. The other changed into a sworn announcement from Steedman written in easy, careful penmanship. I was paid $1,000 by way of Fred Trump to take the SAT for his son. Beneath that line turned into a signature, and below the signature, proof of identity, vintage Navy data, matching handwriting samples. A scanned identity from a VA health center bed. Jasmine read it again, although she failed to want to. Each word was burned into her bloodstream. Now, this wasn't just about IQ anymore. It wasn't even about vanity. This became approximately a lie so vintage, so cautiously buried that its reality had started to odor like delusion. But right here it changed into, sitting quietly beneath her hand. Throughout the room, Trump turned into nonetheless speaking, bragging about how he aced every take a look at on every occasion. How some human beings just are not cut out for excellence. His voice carried like static, empty, and limitless. He had no idea the floor became crumbling underneath him. Jasmine didn't interrupt. She didn't even recoil due to the fact the trap turned into now absolutely set. And the subsequent time she spoke, it wouldn't be to reply, it would be to show. The room settled into its rhythm once more, but Jasmine wasn't listening. She wasn't here to journey the noise. She was here to use it. And Trump, so loud, so certain, turned into giving her every tool she needed. The chairman known as on her for questioning. She stood slowly. No rush, no dramatics, just precision in motion. She approached the microphone with the identical energy she brought into courtrooms, not to shout, but to disassemble. Mr. Trump, she commenced, voice calm, nearly tender. For your comments in advance, you referred to yourself as a completely solid genius and someone who's constantly examined surprisingly well. Is that accurate? Trump grinned, already puffing with pleasure. It really is proper. I have constantly tested extraordinarily properly. A number of the best scores they've ever visible. Now not just IQ, SATs too. It really is how I got into Wharton. Jasmine nodded slowly, letting silence wrap around the words like rope. And you've made public claims about your academic fulfillment before, haven't you? Which you graduated at the pinnacle of your class. Honestly, he said. You may ask anybody, tremendous marks. Wharton loved me, my professors very inspired. The room stayed quiet, however the air grew sharp. Jasmine's gaze failed to shift. Would you be inclined to make the one's facts public, sir? Your SAT ratings, your university transcripts, since you brought them into the general public discourse? Trump scoffed. Certain, I have got not anything to hide. I've stated it for years, happy to reveal them, they prove the whole thing I have stated. I passed with flying shades, everybody knows it. Across the chamber, a few aides began to look at each other. Marjorie stopped writing. Even Jim Jordan leaned ahead barely, sensing something tighten. However, Trump did not note. He became too busy looking the cameras. Jasmine didn't smile. Thank you for confirming that, Mr. Trump. Because I've hear her hand tapped gently on the folder, now not commencing it, but files that relate to your standardized test history. Trump blinked once, simply once, a twitch. Not fear, not but however a ripple in the mask. You wouldn't thoughts, she persisted, if this committee reviewed those materials to examine them together with your statements right here nowadays. Correct? Trump shrugged. Go ahead. I have stated what I stated. They'll most effective confirm it. The hook was in, and Jasmine hadn't even raised her voice. She turned in the direction of the chairman. Mr. Chairman, along with your permission, I'll publish those gadgets into the hearing file at the realization of latest testimony. He nodded silent. Trump leaned lower back smug again. See, instructed you transparency. But he hadn't noticed the shift in her posture, the faint coiling of energy around her subsequent pass. He thought she'd come for blood. He notioned she'd strike speedy. That become the sport, he understood. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't swinging. She become carving. He idea she'd attack. She become letting him construct the scaffold himself. The silence in the room was not quiet. It was loaded. Each digicam locked on Jasmine Crockett as she slowly opened the folder in the front of her. Her hands moved with doctor-like precision. No longer theatrical, no longer rushed, just controlled like someone who knew the moment she cracked that seal, a one-of-a-kind type of gravity would input the room. She slid a unmarried aged letter from its sleeve. The paper was yellowed at the edges, typewritten with a faint watermark still visible underneath the ink. She held it up in brief, then positioned it carefully on the desk wherein the cameras ought to see every word. She didn't talk proper away. She permit the anticipation breathe, let it stretch taut across each spine within the chamber. This, she said frivolously, is an legit verbal exchange from the Big Apple Navy Academy dated May also 10th, 1964. Trump's head tilted only a little. A flicker exceeded behind his eyes, popularity or maybe dread carrying a acquainted mask. Jasmine read aloud, "This letter is to verify that Cadet Donald J. Trump did no longer seem for his scheduled SAT examination on May additionally 2nd, 1964. No explanation changed into furnished. Rescheduling became now not requested." The words landed like a slap. Some reporters gasped, chairs shifted. Jim Jordan blinked hard. Eric Trump stopped tapping his pen and Marjorie Taylor Greene dropped her notepad. Trump laughed too loud, too rapid. "That's nonsense." By no means came about. "I have were given best scores, ask all people." Jasmine did not respond. She simply reached into the folder again and pulled out a tablet. One tap, the display lit up and the speakers crackled. A grainy video started to play. The room turned to the screen love it become watching an eclipse. On display, a frail man in a medical institution mattress, skinny, faded, but clear-eyed. He looked into the camera with the weight of a long time in his stare. "My name is Robert Steedman," the man said. "In 1964, I was paid $1,000 with the aid of Fred Trump to take the SAT examination for his son, Donald." The room froze. Even Trump failed to speak. Steedman persevered, voice regular. "I had better ratings. I was promised a desire. I wore his cadet uniform. I signed his name. I took the test. And I have saved that mystery for 58 years. Trump exploded. "This is faux news. That guy does not even exist." He slammed his palm in opposition to the desk. The mics jumped. His face flushed darkish. "I in no way overlooked a test in my life. This is a hoax, a witch hunt." But Jasmine did not cringe. She stepped again from the microphone. "The guy you declare would not exist," she stated, changed into showed by way of two federal investigators, a handwriting analyst and a witness safety advisor. His testimony is signed, notarized, and now entered into the congressional file. Trump stood, fists clenched. "I want that stricken. You cannot position that on report." Chairman Emlen leaned forward. "You testified under oath, Mr. Trump." She simply added receipts. The target market once still now buzzed like a shaken hive. However, Jasmine didn't feed it. She sat down. The trap had sprung and she hadn't even raised her voice. It turned into the sound of unraveling power, and it started out with Eric Trump's voice cracking like a whip across the chamber. "Cut the feed. Reduce the goddamn feed," he yelled, standing midway out of his chair, arms flailing toward the nearest Capitol technician. "This is illegal. You cannot air this." His voice wasn't company. It was frantic, shaky with the panic of a man watching the curtain fall too soon, but the purple lights on the cameras stayed strong. CNN did not cringe. MSNBC turned up their volume. Jasmine didn't have a look at him. She did not need to. The proof changed into already inside the bloodstream of the instant, and there was no antidote. Marjorie Taylor Greene shot up from her seat like a fuse had ultimately burned down to the price. "Mr. Chairman," she shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the display screen, "strike it from the record. This is man or woman assassination. That is unconstitutional." Chairman Emlen stayed calm, leaning into his mic like a person studying a verdict carved in stone. The whole thing said beneath oath stays on file. His voice became even but final, consisting of sworn affidavit and tested testimony from federal investigators. Trump banged the table once more. His knuckles went white. "That is a setup. She's a liar. I call for a rebuttal witness." "That is faux." I in no way, however, he was drowning now, caught between fury and the sort of fear a person feels when he realizes the doorways are locked and the fireplace is actual. Cameras did not blink. News hounds typed like stenographers at a gunfight. Inside the manipulate rooms of each major community, manufacturers whispered, "Do not you dare reduce away." At the back of Jasmine, her aide surpassed over another document methodically, silently. It wasn't showmanship, it was precision struggle. Jim Jordan leaned over to Green, whispering, "We want a stall. Call procedural put off via time." But time wasn't theirs anymore. Jasmine eventually spoke. Calm, regular, the voice of someone who knew the constructing turned into burning because she lit the healthy. "Mr. Trump," she stated, "you offered to share your instructional file. We honestly confirmed what the record constantly changed into." Trump's seethed chest heaving under his suit like a typhoon barely zipped in. She continued, "You known as me low IQ, referred to as others unqualified, however I failed to want to shout. I delivered the fact and that I permit it communicate for itself." Inexperienced slammed her notebook close. Jordan's hands have been clenched tight sufficient to bleach his knuckles. Eric sat backpedal but simplest because his knees had started to buckle. M. Llewellyn gabbled once, simply once, sharp. The sound cracked like a shot. "This hearing will proceed as scheduled," he stated. "And unless you have proof to the opposite, Mr. Trump, I recommend you stay seated." But Jasmine wasn't finished. Not yet, because what she had dropped was proof, and what changed into coming next became purpose. The chamber had fallen right into a silence so complete it had become a legitimate of its very own. Not peace, now not respect. Something else raw bowled over stillness. It moved through the room like strain before an earthquake. Donald Trump sat frozen fingers tracing hectic circles at the table like he become searching for an go out that didn't exist. Marjorie stopped scribbling. Jordan crossed his fingers. Eric regarded down, no longer out of shame, however, because there has been nothing left to observe. They had all heard 1,000 stories before, however, nothing like this. Nothing that did not scream and yet split the ground below them besides. And on the center of it, Jasmine Crockett sat perfectly still. She failed to adjust her mic. She failed to shift her notes. She didn't restore her jacket. Her silence wasn't hesitation. It turned into verdict. Then, without converting tone, without raising quantity, she stated the phrases that turned the room to stone. "That is what you known as low IQ, fact underneath oath." The sentence hit tougher than the evidence itself. No longer as it became loud, as it becomes surgical, due to the fact it became earned, because every body in that room remembered exactly how Trump had sneered at her, spat those phrases like gum, caught to his shool. People, and now here she changed into, nonetheless particular, composed, preserving in her hand a file that shook the very foundation of his public personality. She didn't need revenge, she had receipts. No person moved. No one interrupted. Chairman M. Llewellyn blinked slowly, cleared his throat and looked at the clock, now not to check the time, however, because even he failed to need to appearance her in the attention just but. Jasmine grew to become the envelope sideways and slid it below her notes. Deliberate, slow, now not to hide it but to make room for what got here subsequent. Due to the fact this wasn't the stop. This was the road earlier than the next chapter. She wasn't simply here to prove he lied. She changed into right here to expose who paid the rate. And she had one extra file ready underneath her palm. Now not yellowed with age just like the first. This one was pristine, crisp, filed by someone who had nothing however desire until it changed into taken away by a check, a handshake, and a fraud. Jasmine did not say every other phrase, she didn't want to. The strength of restraint had already achieved more harm than outrage ever could. Outside, the news ticker screamed, "Jasmine Crockett dismantles. Trump with 1964 ESAT proof. Congresswoman flips Trump's IQ insult into stay public humiliation." Capitol Hill hears the loudest silence in modern political history. And nonetheless internal that room, no one breathed due to the fact they knew what became coming next. And that they knew it would not be about Trump. It would be approximately the boy who by no means made it in. The one whose story was scrubbed off the file so Trump's could be written. However, that wasn't even the maximum risky lie she introduced together with her due to the fact the following name in her folder wasn't Donald Trump. It became the pupil who paid the rate for his fraud. She waited till the silence had settled deep until even the digicam stopped blinking and simply listened. Then, with the identical calm that shattered Trump's armor, Jasmine reached into the folder once more. But this time, it wasn't Trump's call she changed into pulling out. It became a person no person in that room had ever heard of. A person who had by no means sat in the white residence, never stood on a debate level, never insulted a congresswoman on state television. Elliot Harmon, she stated, her voice quieter, now greater particular. A black pupil from Queens, carried out to the equal college, same year, equal location. His SAT rating based on certified facts changed into 1,420, higher than the common admission rating on the time, and extensively higher than Mr. Trump's actual rating, which we now know he didn't earn. A low murmur rose in the room, soft however sharp. Reporters glanced at each other. Something approximately the call so ordinary, so forgotten, hit more difficult than any insult due to the fact this wasn't political anymore. This became human. Jasmine persevered, lifting a 2D file and protecting it in the direction of the screen. That is a letter dated June 11, 1964 from the Admissions Committee on the Wharton College of the University of Pennsylvania. It's Miles, addressed to Elliot Harmon. She started out to study every phrase like a stone dropped into nevertheless water. Pricey Mr. Harmon, we remorse to inform you that your application has not been selected for admission. Due to excessive extent of candidates, we have no room for opportunity candidates this 12 months. And then she paused. Her eyes scanned the web page till they reached the very last handwritten line at the lowest. A be aware now not supposed for Elliot's eyes, however left at the back of by means of the administrator who signed it. Too many quotas filled, too volatile, the words hit the chamber like a slap. No gasps this time, simply breath held. Len shifted in his seat. AOC leaned forward slowly. Jim Jordan appeared down. Even Trump, now oddly quiet, narrowed his eyes, however stated nothing. Jasmine laid the letter flat on the desk in front of her. He turned into 17, valedictorian, son of a bus driving force and a faculty nurse. Implemented early, met all necessities and but denied. Her voice failed to tremble, but it landed like grief. He never were given a 2D chance, never were given a seat at the table due to the fact someone else, a person with a powerful call, a checkbook, and no test scores already sat in it. The burden of that truth didn't just grasp in the room, whom it constructed a wall across it. Not partisan, not left or proper, just a wall of quiet injustice, plain and bloodless. And Jasmine stood on one aspect of it, retaining a call that had been buried in dust for 60 years. However, that letter was most effective half the tale. And what Elliot Harmon did next could trade the whole lot. Jasmine failed to talk. She did not need to, the call had already finished its work. Elliot Harmon was not only a line on a rejection letter. He was a crack walking through the muse of the whole room, and the silence that observed became heavier than any gavel. She tapped her tablet twice. The display at the wall flickered, then packed with a soft photograph of a female seated on a worn leather-based couch. Palms clasped tight, eyes already moist. The overlay examined Danielle Harmon, daughter of Elliot Harmon. Her voice trembled earlier than it even started. My father, she said, respiratory tough, carried that pain his entire life. She seemed down, wiped her nostril. He in no way pointed out it at once. Not to me, no longer even to my mom. But whenever someone said the phrase Ivy League, he'd move quiet. Every time a person requested approximately his dreams, he'd simply say, it wasn't the right time. A tear slid down her cheek. She failed to wipe it this time. She allowed it fall. My dad should have been in boardrooms, in classrooms, in authorities. However, he ended up riding a city bus in Queens for 32 years. And he did it with grace, with delight, but by no means with peace. The room held still, every face fixed on the display screen. Jasmine's eyes did not depart Danielle's, now not as soon as. The video shifted, now audio most effective. A dated, crackling recording clip from a voicemail left on Danielle's cell phone simply months earlier than Elliot exceeded. The sound pleasant become difficult, however his voice, deep-weathered, became unmistakable. I usually concept I wasn't top sufficient, Elliot stated. I thought maybe I ignored something. Perhaps it become my essay. Maybe they didn't like my picture. I failed to recognize they by no means even saw me. Danielle's voice lower, back lower, now breaking. He died without ever understanding the truth. Without ever knowing he become qualified, that he became more than enough. That his seat turned into stolen before he ever sat down. The screen diminished to black, no song, no observation, simply that silence again. This time full of sorrow, full of names like Elliot left out of memories written by men who in no way earned their vicinity. Jasmine stood slowly. The folder changed into closed now. The record become clean. She scanned the room. Every eye met hers and no person dared appearance away. My father, she stated softly, become a teacher. He informed me as soon as that lies are like shadows. They stretch farther the longer you allow them to cross unchallenged. But when you shine the proper light simply once, they vanish. She placed her hand lightly over the closed folder. That is what today is, a light for one guy who misplaced his danger, and for each other name they tried to bury beside him. Trump sat immobile, mouth tight, palms clenched, no comebacks, no grin. Due to the fact even he knew there has been no manner to insult a ghost who had just stood inside the room and spoken via his daughter. However, Jasmine wasn't finished yet. Due to the fact on occasion ghosts do not just talk, every now and then they call for justice. It didn't count if you were in a diner in Nebraska, a school room in Big Apple, or a nursing home in Atlanta. Screens everywhere lit up with the same photograph. Jasmine Crockett, immobile, framed against a hearing room, frozen in disbelief. After which the international started talking. No longer the pundits, not the politicians, the people. First it become Twitter, then got here TikTok, Reddit, Instagram stories. Heaps of messages spilled across the net in actual time, stacking through the second one. The sentence stored repeating like a chant without a leader. She just exposed the whole lot. Some wrote with fireplace. Trump paid to Scouse borrow a seat. Crockett added the receipt. Elliot Harmon's name will gain knowledge of in colleges one day because of her. Others published with sorrow. My dad applied to Wharton in 1970. He notion he wasn't top sufficient. He died thinking that. This just broke something in me. I have been advised I used to be an excessive amount of or no longer smart sufficient my complete existence. She failed to increase her voice, however she raised all of us. Even late-night comedians paused their jokes. Even conservative forums, typically echo chambers, had cracks forming inside the walls. One trending thread study, this doesn't feel like politics. This seems like history. Cable news anchors struggled to preserve up. CNN reduce away from the panel and permit the photos communicate for itself. MSNBC rolled Jasmine's quote on repeat. This is what you known as low IQ, fact beneath oath. Fox attempted to pivot, attempted to solid doubt, but the emotion in the room, the humanity of it made even the most competitive spin experience brittle and determined. In the chamber, the power had changed. Long gone became the vanity, the jeering. Even the marble walls felt heavier now. Trump did not fidget anymore. He sat unnaturally still, his jaw tight, the recommendations of his ears read. Marjorie Taylor, inexperienced, had her hands in her lap, her notes untouched. Eric Trump stared on the ground like he was hoping to fall through it. And Jasmine Crockett. She failed to blink. She let the silence maintain. She permit the arena sense what it had not noted for decades. Chairman M. Leland shifted in the back of the microphone. His voice came quiet. Congresswoman Crockett, do you have whatever else you wish to present? No hesitation, Jasmine reached slowly into her folder again. The first file had peeled again a lie. The second one had resurrected a person, but now she lifted a report thicker than either of the final. A new folder stamped not in diminished ink, however in clean pink, classified U.S. Department of Education. Signatures were in part redacted, but the watermark changed into unmistakable, and the burden of it landed before a unmarried phrase turned into spoken. She located it flat at the table. Her palms stayed resting gently on pinnacle. And even though the cameras couldn't study her eyes, the message became clean. This wasn't about Trump anymore. This turned into about all people who helped him get away with it. And just when the country notion it could not pass deeper, Jasmine raised the second one report. Jasmine failed to say a phrase while she positioned the second one folder at the table. She failed to need to, no longer yet. The burden of the moment had already shifted the air. It was heavier, now denser, like the oxygen have been replaced via something sharper, something electric. Trump washed her hand with developing stiffness. His eyes flicked to the cameras, to the committee, then lower back to her hands. The man who once stuffed areas with noise now sat in a chair that unexpectedly regarded too small for his silence. He knew she turned into approximately to open something he couldn't close. Jasmine unclasped the folder. In her a printed university transcript, smartly formatted, authentic searching, watermarked, with the seal of the University of Pennsylvania. It was the same record Trump's campaign had quietly circulated in 2016 and again for the duration of stump speeches in 2020. It indexed grades, direction titles, honors, even a signature. He had bragged approximately it on Communicate Indicates, waved it in interviews, let it linger on display simply long enough for supporters to experience impressed and combatants to hesitate. Jasmine slid the web page under the overhead display and then with surgical calm, she spoke. That is the academic transcript Mr. Trump's marketing campaign has referenced repeatedly considering that 2016. It claims to reflect his achievements at Wharton. She paused, letting that sit down for a beat. We submitted this document to 2 unbiased credential analysts and a curriculum archivist from the University of Pennsylvania. She grew to become the web page sluggish and deliberate, and here's what they determined. She tapped as soon as on the display screen, a zoomed-in model of the transcript seemed. Inside the first semester, there may be a course titled Business Strategy misspelled with an A. That direction did no longer exist in 1966. It doesn't exist now. A flicker moved throughout the committee. Newshounds perked up. Even M. Lellen leaned ahead. Inside the 2D semester, she continued a class titled Global Economics of 4. A direction that according to Wharton archives was never presented at any level. On the time, Wharton handiest presented Economics 1 in their kill. Gasoline broke across the room like glass. A person within the gallery audibly whispered, "Oh my God." And subsequently she stated, voice now sealed with purpose at the bottom of the file. Subsequent to the registrar's seal, the call of the verifying reliable is spelled incorrectly. The actual registrar, Dr. Leonard Wexler, spelled his name with 2 E. This one uses 1. He has showed underneath oath. He did now not sign this file. Trump's eyes went extensive, not in worry but in calculation, attempting to find and break out course, a pivot, but there wasn't one. The walls were ultimate in, not by way of force but by using reality. Jasmine stepped lower back. This record become used to justify qualifications for the presidency of the United States. It changed into proven to voters, referred to in speeches, surpassed to reporters. It's far without query a forgery. Trump stood midway up. This is a hit job, a political stunt, but his voice cracked. Jasmine didn't draw back. She folded the page as soon as slowly and placed it again within the folder. Then she seemed up proper on the digicam. He did not simply lie approximately a test. He lied about the diploma, about the story, approximately the person he claimed to be. And what got here subsequent would shake every vote he ever earned. The folder become back on the desk closed, but the anxiety it left at the back of clung to the room like static earlier than a lightning strike. Nobody spoke, not even Trump. He hadn't sat back down, but he hadn't moved both. Simply stood there half-cocked, stuck between denial and dread. Then Jasmine turned barely to her right and nodded as soon as a door at the facet of the chamber opened. A tall guy in a gray healthy entered, thin, deliberate, with a briefcase tucked beneath his arm like a scalpel equipped to be used. His call turned into Dr. Eli Brenner, credential analyst, professor emeritus and archival consultant to 3 Ivy League registrars. He didn't want creation. His resume had already been submitted to the document. His presence. Now it become for the camera. Jasmine gestured to the chair beside her. Dr. Brenner, she said frivolously, can you please inform this committee what you located approximately the report Mr. Trump's marketing campaign submitted as proof of his Wharton diploma? Brenner opened his briefcase, pulled out a single annotated sheet, and changed his glasses. Yes, he stated, his voice steady, educational, unnervingly cold. Upon overview of the transcript in question, my crew and that eye recognized a couple of anomalies steady with record falsification. The most extensive, although no longer the handiest blunders, is the font used all through the paper. He paused. Jasmine led him. The sort face on the transcript especially, the headers and registrar block uses Garamond Most Reliable Pro, a font circle of relatives released in 1989. The room didn't gasp this time. It just held still. That font, he continued, did no longer exist in 1968. No longer on typewriters, no longer in college print stores, no longer in any official documentation standards of the technology. Trump shifted uncomfortably, then snapped. So now fonts are political. Brenner failed to blink. We additionally referred to kerning inconsistencies and pixel-based irregularities inside the college seal, he added. This shows that the image of the seal was lifted from a present-day virtual document, probable a PNG, then layered onto a clean report. This is not best atypical for respectable records. It's miles technically impossible for that 12 months. Jasmine leaned in only slightly. Now not to dramatize, simply to slice clean. Dr. Brenner, to your professional opinion, is the file true? No, Congresswoman, it is a forgery. She turned again closer to Trump but did not study him. Instead, she regarded into the cameras. Sir, she asked, is lying about your IQ extra dangerous than lying about a nuclear code? The question dropped like a floorboard snapping under weight. No person spoke, not an unmarried rustle from the gang. The chamber, moments in the past crammed with bluster, was now mute, as though every living soul was awaiting someone else to respire first. Trump said nothing because there has been no answer that wouldn't indict him. Jasmine sat lower back, her face unreadable. The record become fake. The font didn't exist. The man who once mocked others for being unqualified had never even qualified for the lie he lived. And outdoor the chamber, millions have been already asking if he's solid his beyond. What else did he fake? The weight of Dr. Brenner's testimony hadn't even completely settled while Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez leaned into her microphone. She failed to want quantity, simplest precision. Her voice cut through the thick silence like a scalpel. This isn't approximately intelligence, she said, every word measured and unshakable. That is about deception as a tool of statecraft, about a man who forged the phantasm of merit and used that illusion to seize the best workplace inside the land. Her declaration did not need applause. It did not look for validation. It simply existed within the room, heavy and immovable. James Rassin accompanied his tone, bloodless and felony, like a gavel made of ice. Madam Chair, he started, I would like to formally propose that this committee publish its findings to the branch of justice for crook evaluate, especially educational fraud as a way of marketing campaign deception and misrepresentation of federal qualifications underneath oath. He did not study Trump when he said it. He failed to need to. The word fraud had already been spoken on live TV. Now it was being filed. Trump sat slouched the way a shape leans right before it falls. His mouth opened in brief, however no sound followed. His arms twitched at the brink of the desk, tugging faintly at a serviette that wasn't there. The man who once ruled rooms with insults and extent now sat stranded in a silence of his own making. And all of the cameras locked on him knew it. Jasmine hadn't moved. She stayed flawlessly still, her face a sculpture of manipulate. No triumph, no heat, simply presence. She had grew to become stillness into dominance, silence into highlight, and the USA could sense it. In homes across the USA, people weren't converting the channel. They were leaning nearer. They weren't scrolling away. They had been texting friends, turn this on now. Behind Jasmine, her aides moved with quiet urgency. No frenzy, no chaos, just efficiency. Documents were acceded to the chair, dates, logged, exhibits numbered. The hearing was not a performance. It changed into a ledger, and every lie Trump had once sold turned into being itemized and entered in real time. Inside the press gallery, reporters typed furiously. Displays buzzed, blogs lit up, headlines started to form before the statements even completed. Forgery showed, fraud alleged, crumble in movement. And nevertheless, Jasmine hadn't opened the final record. Not but. She didn't want to, not whilst the room turned into nevertheless echoing from the fact that had just been dropped. Because what came subsequent wasn't just about proving who Trump wasn't. It became approximately revealing who he had usually focused. That insult low IQ wasn't random. It wasn't off the cuff. It turned into strategic, tactical, and deeply racial. Jasmine had recognized it the instant he stated it. She'd seen that playbook before, but she had waited patiently, deliberately, and now, with the nationwide breath held, she became nearly equipped to reveal them why that insult wasn't a gaffe. It became a sample, and Jasmine hadn't even touched the very last piece, but the lie approximately why he insulted her inside the first region. Jasmine Crockett did not improve her voice. She failed to want to. The room became already silent, hollowed out by using revelation. And now she became geared up to turn the blade, now not with rage, but with evidence. She lifted a small faraway and pressed play. The video display units flickered, then started to talk for themselves. First, Maxine Waters, the clip reduced in mid-sentence. Trump snarling at a rally podium. She's a totally low IQ person. The crowd laughed, then AOC, low IQ, I do not think she is aware of what she's talking approximately. Applause. Then Ilhan Omar, disaster, no longer clever, low IQ. Greater laughter, louder, and then Jasmine. The tape rolled Crockett's IQ. Perhaps she ought to stick with traffic court docket. The timeline stretched throughout 7 years, 4 ladies, 4 targets, 1 insult. While the display went dark, Jasmine waited, 1 beat. Then she stood, her voice did not upward thrust. It sank into bone, into sense of right and wrong. On every occasion he fears a woman of color who speaks reality. This is his reflex, she said, no longer accusing, however stating. He would not debate, he belittles. He does not counter, he erases. Her eyes swept throughout the days, then throughout the blinking cameras. It's now not simply rhetoric, it's ritual. Trump sat frozen, now not cocky, no longer interrupting. His hands have been clasped but tightly white-knuckled, twitching. Jasmine failed to look at him, she spoke through him. You said it was about intelligence, she endured. However, intelligence does not scare you, accountability does. Outdoor the chamber, tweets exploded like firecrackers in a dry wooded area. Hashtags bloomed. Reflex of worry and coffee IQ sample. News anchors interrupted midsection to scale back to the hearing. Elderly visitors leaned ahead in recliners across the U.S., mouths barely open. Due to the fact now it wasn't pretty much fraud. It turned into about sample. It turned into approximately power constructed on repetition and silence maintained by way of life. Marjorie Taylor, inexperienced, fidgeted in her seat. Matt Gaetz tapped his pen like a metronome, but nobody objected. No one shouted reclaiming my time due to the fact Jasmine hadn't made an accusation. She had proven it. AOC, looking from the aspect, gave a close to invisible nod. Rashidita Clay blinked, difficult, however failed to speak. What Jasmine had finished wasn't a takedown, it was interpreting. She had taken the insult intended to lessen her and used it as a replicate. Now it was reflecting on every wall. Jasmine became back to the days. Language subjects, in particular when it's used as a weapon wrapped in humor, sealed with applause. She paused, and especially while it's recycled against the equal sort of humans again and again. She failed to ask for sympathy. She by no means had, but in that second she wasn't simply standing for herself. She became dragging into sunlight hours every dark nook wherein belittlement were used as a method. And for the primary time, thousands and thousands of American citizens have been seeing the map, the sample, the machine. However, what Jasmine hadn't revealed yet become why Trump used that insult on that day and what he became seeking to distract the sector from. The room did not breathe, now not because it wasn't allowed to, but because it no longer knew how. After the reel of insults inside the calm dissection of many years' vintage rhetoric, there have been no cries of fake information, no taunts, no last-minute outbursts. Trump sat still, no longer out of grace but out of calculation, misfired. The blow hadn't come from rage, it had come from stillness, and that is what stunned him. Jasmine stood without paper, without notes, just her, the microphone, and thousands of blinking eyes at the back of the lens. She leaned forward slightly, gaze locked on the camera like it became the United States itself. I do not need to show my IQ, she said, consistent and sharp. He had to destroy it because it's the one issue he could not buy. The silence after wasn't dead. It became alive. It had tooth. Trump shifted in his seat for the primary time in minutes, but there was nowhere to cover. The script he was speculated to follow, the part in which she'd lose her temper, yell, stumble, turned into long past. Jasmine had burned it. Then she rewrote it with statistics. She did not speak with fury, she spoke with memory. He called me low IQ, she endured like he did Maxine, like he did Alan, like he did AOC. But the truth is, he doesn't mean unintelligent. He way uncontrollable. She paused just lengthy enough for the words to sink deep. He manner no longer his, no longer afraid, not silent. Somewhere in the 0.33 row, an useful resource from CNN mouthed, "Oh my God." MSNBC's breaking information churn flickered into existence. Phones buzzed in each pocket throughout the U.S. In retirement homes in Florida and condo buildings in Detroit, older viewers leaned toward the display, no longer simply watching, but feeling something move that hadn't moved in years. Jasmine's tone shifted lower, almost a whisper, but somehow heavier. He inherited money. I inherited a fight, she stated. He bought his name. I earned mine. And whilst he realized he couldn't erase mine with a slur, he tried to lessen it with a lie. Trump's face, once purple with defiance, now regarded faded with something he did not admit he had fear. Not of being wrong, however, of being unmasked by way of someone who didn't need to scream to be heard. No one interrupted, not Jordan, now not Green, now not even the chairman, because it wasn't only a declaration anymore. It changed into a reckoning. Jasmine took one very last breath and appeared directly into the camera again. Name me what you need, however the truth doesn't want your permission to exist, and neither do I, she stepped, returned, hand-still voice achieved, however her presence lingered like smoke after lightning. The chamber, the U.S. The sector had all sat frozen because deep down everyone knew the insult wasn't about her intelligence. It became about his reflection. The silence cracked. No longer from outrage, no longer from defense, however from the sound no person expected in a congressional hearing. A single clap, then two, then a slow building thunder from the gallery rolling like a hurricane, breaking over years of anxiety. Grown men rose to their FT, veterans, instructors, a retired Chews with tears in his eyes. For the first time within the reminiscence of the chamber, the walls echoed, now not with partisan bickering but with something towards truth locating oxygen. Jasmine Crockett failed to bow, she did not smile. She sincerely stepped back and allowed the instant pass through her like wind through stone. Marjorie Taylor, inexperienced, glanced round, fuming and frozen, unsure whether to object or truly disappear. Jim Jordan buried his face behind a stack of free papers, pretending to study. Trump did not pass at all. From the second one row, the head of the NAACP rose, no longer as a protester, no longer as a politician, however as a witness. Madame Chair, he said loudly, though nobody had called on him. That lady, he pointed lightly reverently. That lady is the voice of a time history attempted to silence. She isn't a footnote. She is the instant. Applause grew once more, this time louder. Journalists stopped taking notes and simply stared. On MSNBC, Rachel Maddow whispered, I have blanketed quite a few hearings, however I've by no means visible one rewrite the mood of a rustic in actual time. Throughout social media, Jasmine's phrases were already being looped, quoted, spliced into tribute movies. But internal that room, none of that mattered to her due to the fact Jasmine Crockett hadn't come for the ovation. She hadn't come for the cameras, the memes, the legacy-shaping headlines. She got here for something heavier. She came for the report. She leaned in the direction of her mic once more, calm, surgical, composed. Thank you, she stated. However, I'm no longer finished. The applause slowed, then ceased like an orchestra obeying an unseen baton. This is not about a single insult. That is approximately a pattern, and styles have outcomes. Her hand reached slowly into the folder, still resting at the desk. It hadn't moved for the reason that beginning of the hearing. It sat there like a sealed verdict, untouched, ready, one extra document, one more web page. Her hands paused on it. Then came the line. Quiet, sharp, very last. She didn't come right here to defeat a person. She got here so history could take into account that a person stood up and in no way bowed once more. She wasn't just closing a case. She became establishing a legacy. She failed to increase her voice. She didn't need to. After the entirety, after the receipts, the silence, the letters, the cast files, the status ovation, Jasmine Crockett returned to in which all of it started out. She tapped her mic as soon as the room held its breath. Then, with the calm precision of a person who had waited not hours, however a lifetime, she spoke. You instructed me to sit down, genius. Her tone wasn't bitter. It became surgical, controlled. The word echoed within the chamber, now a long way heavier than when it had first been thrown, like a reasonably priced insult at a press conference. She failed to draw back then, and he or she did not blink now. She turned to her right, picked up a placard no larger than a criminal pad. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic, however, as she held it excessive, the letters published on it would possibly as well were carved into stone. Article 1, Section 6, United States Constitution. For any speech or debate in either residence, they shall not be wondered in any other vicinity. The room went still. Jasmine turned it to stand the camera, then slowly panned it towards the Republican individuals on the panel. This, she stated, tapping the phrases, is the law of the land. That is what I deliver with me into every hearing, each assault, each whisper that announces I don't belong. Trump shifted in his seat. She looked at him immediately. I failed to sit down, she said, her voice now low and gradual because I wasn't status for myself. I stood for each female who has ever been instructed they had been too loud, too indignant, too black, too much. I stood for each daughter who watched their mom maintain her tongue in rooms that were not made for her voice. I stood for the reality. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It turned into full, heavy rate like the moment before lightning moves. Out of doors, the chamber's social media lit up once more. Hashtags exploded. TikToks rolled, a CNN anchor mouthed wow on a hot mic. Inner, Trump folded his arms tighter. No phrases, no smirk, just the stillness of a man realizing the punchline had changed into a mirror. Jasmine diminished the placard lightly, like lowering a flag on the cease of a struggle. No person thought she'd live to tell the tale. Her eyes swept the room one remaining time, not to intimidate, now not to brag, however to make certain they had been all looking whilst the fact refused to sit down. And then with one breath left to burn, she closed her pocketbook and said, I yield my time, but I'm able to by no means yield my really worth. He failed to say a word, no final insult, no ultimate spin. Donald J. Trump rose from his chair as though the floor had betrayed him and walked out underneath the glow of cameras that had as soon as worshipped his every gesture. His shoes echoed off the marble like whole declarations. For the primary time in a long term, the room didn't observe his lead. CNN broke the silence first. The Kyrene hit like a bell toll. A legacy-shaken congressional showdown sends surprise waves through nation. Anchors sat witty-eyed, speechless, then slowly leaned in because the footage replayed on a loop. Jasmine Crockett, calm as metallic, holding the Constitution like a replicate before power. She didn't shout, one host whispered. She did not need to. On Twitter, the moment metastasized into something large. Via the second hour, Seton Genius had surpassed 4 million mentions. By using Hour 4, it surpassed 12 million. Young adults remixed the instant. Veterans tweeted, thanks. Even the late-night comics stepped apart. One meme truly showed Jasmine's status still with the caption, she broke him without touching him. But outdoor the pixels and sound bites, something deeper stirred. Jasmine's office telephone strains jammed by midday. Staffers study emails out loud, taken aback into silence. An 86-year vintage retired teacher from Birmingham wrote, I used to be advised to sit down in 1962. Watching you stand made me experience like I sooner or later stood too. A nurse from Detroit sent a postcard that examined, you didn't just preserve him responsible. You made my daughter believe she ought to. At the streets, work of art commenced to seem. Jasmine's silhouette placard raised, painted on a church wall in Atlanta, a school fence in Oakland, a courthouse in Philadelphia. The quote underneath each one, I will by no means yield my really worth. Inside the Capitol, the energy shifted. Journalists leaned in toward Black women lawmakers. Now the eyes that used to glance beyond Jasmine now observed her through every hallway. Her silence had achieved what no viral sound chunk could, demanded an exceptional type of interest. One born not from spectacle, however, from undeniability. And while the alternative facets scrambled, drafting statements, spinning press releases, whispering crisis conferences, Jasmine sat in her office on my own, rereading a letter from a 14-12 antique lady in rural Kansas. Scrolled in blue pen, it said, really, my mom says clever women need to be quiet, you proved her wrong. Jasmine folded the paper, slipped it in her briefcase, and exhaled for the first time all day. No longer in remedy, however in readiness. Due to the fact what had simply came about wasn't an ending. It turned into the starting of a hurricane. The Capitol lighting fixtures dwindled into the rear view as Jasmine's car pulled right into a modest lot in Dallas. No podiums here, no marble floors or red lights blinking. Just concrete Texas heat within the quiet hum of a network office that smelled of copier paper and resilience. Jasmine stepped out nonetheless in the equal suit from the listening to, however now it looked like armor that had survived a war. The door hadn't even closed in the back of her when she heard the tiny footsteps. A little black girl, no older than 7, bolted through the lobby with unfiltered pleasure and flung her hands around Jasmine's waist. Her voice trembled, but her eyes burned with something fierce. I want to talk like you someday, she said. Now not like a compliment, like a vow. Jasmine knelt down, brushing a lock of hair from the lady's brow. You already do, she whispered. You simply do not know it yet. The kid nodded like she believed it with every bone in her body. Outdoor, a small crowd had amassed, no longer newshounds, but friends, elders, teachers, janitors, students. Those who had once been told to hush, to attend, to sit down. Now they stood, some with vegetation, some with letters, maximum with not anything but their presence, silent but thunderous. Lower back in her office, Jasmine located the very last record, the only with the forged transcript, right into a locked cabinet. She did not need it anymore. The truth become now not on paper. It was in movement, in millions of minds awoke. She stood through the window as the solar dipped low, casting golden streaks over the parking lot. For years, they tried to giggle her off, communicate over her, read as her to a stereotype. They mocked her voice as it carried something they couldn't measure, readability. And while that failed to paintings, they attempted to question her thoughts, hoping doubt could dim it. However, it hadn't, it by no means might, because that mind wasn't just Jasmine's. It was each woman informed she wasn't clever enough. Every voter gasoline lit by using arrogance in a suit. Every teacher who stayed late to remind a child that books may want to spoil chains. They attempted to silence one voice, and in doing so, they made room for 1,000 greater to upward thrust. While Jasmine chose no longer to bow, however, to upward thrust in silence before a country, she proved that intelligence would not want validation. Best the courage to face whilst others try and erase it. And whilst that little black girl wrapped her fingers around her, the United States saw its mirrored image in that moment. Have you ever stayed silent, not out of worry, however, due to the fact you carried a truth powerful sufficient to alternate the whole thing? Proportionate with us? If this story struck a nerve, don't simply scroll, like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Truth Memories, where voices like Jasmine's remind us that truth doesn't shout, it stands. Faucet the bell. Due to the fact the subsequent chapter won't just reveal a lie, it might wake up something in all and sundry. What part of Jasmine's standstill echoes in you? Leave a remark. Let's no longer simply witness history. Permits, bring it forward. This dramatized tale is stimulated by using real struggles and real people. All characters and talk are fictionalized for remark and schooling. It isn't intended to defame or lie to, however, to encourage mirrored image and civic recognition. Thanks for watching. Truth isn't over. It is just awaiting someone brave sufficient to carry it ahead.